My role in the movement. Well, first of all, I was a teacher or a preacher. So I took on myself the responsibility to go and share my faith, not only with non-Muslims to just create understanding, but primarily to motivate Muslims into becoming more devotional. So my role was firstly to teach Islam and to get the youth mainly to become more committed to being functionally a better Muslim, pray and fast to become those who would themselves in turn go and preach in turn. But that also was coupled with my political awareness. So my role was as a teacher to motivate people for Islam and then instruct them or show them how Islam can be used to sort the various problems that we perceived Muslims were undergoing. Some are real, some are perhaps exaggerated because we are depending on scant information. But nevertheless, there was a duty to find out properly the nature of the problem, the extent, the ways and means of how to bring about change, and the historical factors and the reality of the people, and all these things were missing. So it was very superficial, like anything that happens in life. There's a calamity or a distress, and you just want to help. So the Afghan situation was there. But prior to that, there was always in the background, and there still is, the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Then we also have a problem in Burma. I was born in Bangladesh, so as bordering a place called Chittagong, which is bordering the Burmese border. Rohingyas are there. So that has been going on for more than 100 years. So I'm aware of the Kashmiri problems, the Rohingya problems. We had, myself had undergone that breakup of Pakistan, independence of Bangladesh thing. Then there's the Israeli-Palestinian, then the Afghan thing happened. So there were many things to talk about in terms of problems, colonialism, Israel, and what have you. So my role then became one of those people who, having been exposed to jihad because of my connection to Afghanistan and so on, to then tell the people, look, there is a way which is approved by God and his Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, which allows Muslims to do more than just talk or pray or create awareness or do charity. All of them are good. And that way is to fight in the cause of Allah. So I would then talk to people about the great valiant role that the Prophet had played, like the King David, for example, in the past, and King Solomon, the prophets in the Bible, about being warrior prophets, and how they were actually a means to actually not just repulse the enemy, but to establish God's law. So it became very quickly, very effortlessly and seamlessly a talk about expelling the enemy to establishing the Islamic State. So be a good Muslim. We should take care of our enemies by getting rid of them, freeing our people meaning the Muslims, wherever and whoever they are, any part of the world. And at the same time, we can be those fighters who are actually bringing about or helping to bring about the establishing of God's law by means of an Islamic State or the Caliphate. So my role was more than just recruiting people for a fight for a regional purpose. Let's go and fight in Afghanistan. It was all packaged together in this Islamist ideology. So that was my role. So I went around from mosque to mosque, from places where I held my study circles. I volunteered for 15 years. I kind of, without being paid a penny, everything came from my own pocket. And then people began to donate, which we spent everything. We had a rule in those days. It was not enforced, but people volunteered that anybody who was close to me, including myself, had to donate 10% of their income towards this work, like the tithe concept in past Christianity. So whatever money we could garner from students, young people, ourselves, and a few families, we would use everything, to spread the message and enthuse people. So I was one of the pioneers. So in the 80s up to about mid-90s, I was one of the very few people in the UK across the country raising awareness to inciting or exciting people to come forward and volunteer. So my role was recruiting by means of teaching, preaching, creating awareness. And then, of course, once I had understood how to go there and open the way, to send people for training. Not just saying recruiting for, you should do jihad, but this is the way to it. I can expedite, I can facilitate. So I became, my first encounter was with Jamaat al-Jihad, Jamaat al-Da'wa ila al-Quran wa Sunnah. It was called Jamaat al-Da'wa ila al-Quran wa Sunnah, led by Sheikh Jamilur Rahman in the Kunar province in Afghanistan. It's a long process. I mean, we haven't got time to talk about the process I went through, but I went to Holland. Somebody came from Germany, from a contact in Saudi. So all sorts of things were happening like that. But once I opened the means, I began to send people. Eventually ended up with Lashkar-Taiba, which is based in Lahore in Pakistan, one of the proscribed groups now, and always had the reputation of being one of the most effective guerrilla groups against Indian army and whatnot in Kashmir scenario, although they are not the majority. And as an aside, I'd like to say sometimes the attraction is you want to be with the best, the most effective. That's why perhaps you had a more of a pull from ISIS and a push towards ISIS, because no matter what their barbarities are, they're more effective. They've done the real thing, established the state. Nobody had established Islamic State, and Taliban came much later. In those days, Lashkar-Taiba was the outfit to go with. So I recruited, I sent people for training, I went and fought, I raised money from open declarations at conferences in mosques. And I think it's very important to understand for all of us that I might be seen to be an ex-radical or a former jihadist and all sorts of things like that. But I had widespread support. Now maybe what I stood for resonated with the Muslims because they felt aggrieved. We are being exploited, or foreigners have done this, or these injustices are there and nothing is happening, our governments are corrupt. There's a whole raft of grievances you can press into service. But they supported me, whatever the cause, whatever the denomination. So to the extent I would say, I don't know if these names are familiar to you, within the Muslim body politic, we call the nation Ummah. Shia and Sunni, two broad groups like Catholics and Anglicans and Protestants. The Sunnis are the majority, but within the Sunnis, just like in Shias, there are subgroups, and they are not often totally in harmony with each other. So we will have, for example, those who are more mystical, spiritual, philosophical, Sufis, and those who are not so much as aspects of it, the non-Sufis, but very literal, almost black and white, textual, and we call them Salafis or Wahhabis, the Saudi type. So there's a tension between the Sufis and Salafis. They're very antithetical to each other. Then you have within one school of thought, because there are schools of thoughts of interpreting Islam. So you will have within a school of thought a further split. Like in India, you have the Deobandis and the Barelvis, who both subscribe to one broad school of thought called the Hanafi school of thought. And there are three others as well. Now, the reason for me mentioning all this, Sufi, Salafi, Deobandi, Hanafi, or whatever, is to stress the point, all of them supported me. They didn't say you are a Salafi, you are a Sufi, you are this, you are that, because they all understood I'm doing something good. I'm standing up for the Muslims who are oppressed, at least in Afghanistan, or for a Muslim cause, whether it's Palestine or Kashmir. And I'm using understanding of Islam, which is shared by all denominations, with the differences, but broadly shared. So we have an Islamic heritage of learning for the past 1400 years. So there are jurisprudential material within Islamic knowledge, which any school of thought can then pick and then modify according to their school of thought bias or expertise.